There were very few movies that operated in the same way, and I kept feeling like, well, this is its own thing. The First World War is a war of paralysis. It's a very static war. You know, there's not a great variety in the landscape, and it feels brown. It's just mud and more mud, you know. And so that was one of the reasons that when I discovered this period in 1917, I thought, there's a film here.
We've got orders to cross here.
That is the German front line.
Hold fast! If we're not clever about this, no one will get to your brother.
In 1917, there was one moment in the war when the Germans retreated to the Hindenburg Line. And in that moment, it was one of the few moments when the war was not a war of paralysis. You know, one of the reasons that the First World War is very difficult to make movies about is because the location of the trenches never really changed. Millions of people lost their lives over 300 yards of land. And, you know, really, if you look at it geographically, people went over the top and they got killed. And they went over the top and they got killed. They went over the top. People were celebrated in this war for capturing 200 yards of land, you know. So how can you tell a story about a journey within this war?
Your orders are to deliver a message, calling off tomorrow morning's attack.
But in 1917, the Germans abandoned their line and reconstructed a line 9 miles away. So suddenly, the English and the French and the Belgians were released into this land that they had been fighting over but never seen. You know, farmhouses and orchards and towns and canals. And so that only happened in 1917. So that's why it takes place in that year.
5, take 1.
This movie is about time in many ways, and it makes you experience time with the men, and at one crucial moment become suddenly unaware of time. And so I wanted to connect the audience with the literal passing of time, every step, every breath. Balance was always, I didn't want the pace to feel incessant, I didn't want it to feel metronomic, the same. I didn't want to get stuck in a rhythm. I wanted the rhythms always to shift and change, using elements of the unexpected, planes, snipers, things that you didn't know were there, you know. And on top of that, I wanted the camera sometimes to be subjective, very close, very intimate, and other times to be objective, and see the characters small in a big landscape and understand the geography of their journey. And in a way, we were also bearing witness to what happened. We were bearing witness to no man's land. You weren't shoving it in the audience's face. You were just saying, let your eyes wander over this landscape and catch the details. Sometimes in your peripheral vision, a rat or crows or bodies. Is that a body or is it just mud? Is that a trick of the light? You sort of almost want to be able to watch the characters just moving through space with no dialogue at all. So it was that balance that we were trying to achieve the whole time.
Is that our friends again? Looks like it.
And the other thing is I wanted to use a thriller technique in a way, almost a horror movie technique. I wanted them to know they had to go around the next corner, but to not want to see what was around the next corner at the same time. And in the tension between those two things, wanting but not wanting, having to but trying to pull back, that's where the tension of the movie exists. And knowing that we weren't going to cut meant that you, as an audience, knew you were never going to be ahead of the characters. You were always going to be in the present tense. And it seemed to me, the more I thought about it, the better idea it seemed. But also, the more I thought about it, the more difficult it seemed to achieve technically. So it meant a lot of prep.
Your orders are to get to the second at Kwasi Wood, 1 mile southeast of the town of Lacust.
He told us many stories when I was a kid. You know, he never told his stories to his children. So my dad never heard these stories, but for some reason he decided to tell them to his grandchildren. My grandfather was a novelist and he wrote his autobiography, and one of the stories that features in that autobiography is also one he told me, which is that he enlisted with a friend. He wanted to go to war, he believed in the war. It was only when he got there he realized that the propaganda he had been told by the British press was not in fact the case. It was hell.
Did you hear that story about Wilco? How he lost his ear?
I'm not in the mood.
And he told us one story about carrying a message, and I thought, how cinematic to tell a story about one man carrying a message.
Deliver this to Colonel Mackenzie. It is a direct order to call off tomorrow morning's attack. If you don't, it will be a massacre.
From there, I constructed obviously a separate narrative that is inspired by my grandfather, but this is not my grandfather's story. This is an entirely constructed, based on some of the stories my grandfather told me and many other first-person accounts, and then just one's instinct about what was the right way to tell the story.
Blake, pick a man, bring your kit.
And the story he told, as he told it, was, you know, how weightless life was. In the war, you were constantly walking amongst the dead, and how thin the line between them and you. And I think that permeates the film.
There is only one way this ends. Last man standing.
I was very small, maybe I was 10, 11, and I used to see him, he always washed his hands over and over again for a long time. And I said to my dad, why does Granddad wash his hands? We laugh at him. And he said, because he remembers the mud of the trenches, he could never get clean. And it struck me as amazing that a man who was in his 70s, it should still be part of his being, every fiber of his being. Still, he didn't consciously think about the trenches, but the way he behaved ever since was changed. He was changed.